Well, good morning, everyone. Happy New Year to all of you. If you'll open your Bibles to Numbers chapter 14, that's where we will, oh boy, okay. We've got a font problem. I might need Ryan to do some emergency changing. That font should be white, not black, so I know that there's a solution that just may take a bit. But it looks like you can still see it a little bit. I'm just a little nervous what will happen in future slides. We're going to talk about the problem of fear this morning. And in Numbers 14, to set up the context, God promised to give the land of Canaan to the Israelites as an inheritance. But they were going to have to go to battle with the evil Canaanites in order to take it. And so they send 12 spies to scope out the land. And 10 of those 12 spies came back filled with fear. And those 10 fearful spies filled the entire congregation of Israel with fear too. There were only 2 people who came back, 2 faithful spies. And that was Joshua and Caleb. And they tried to reassure their brethren so that faith would win over their fear. But unfortunately, fear wins out. So let's pick up in verse 7 down through the first part of verse 10. Thank you so much, AV team. Really appreciate that. Verse 7, they all spoke to the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, "The land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." But all the congregation said, to stone them with stones. It is a new year. And a new year comes with new possibilities and new and exciting resolutions, but also new fears. In fact, I learned that there's a technical term for the fear of the new year. It's a real thing called neo-anophobia. And it's because with this new year, you have a lot of fear of the unknown. And you have fears because it prompts us to ask deep questions about our life, like, what is my purpose? What have I been doing with my life before? What should I be doing now? We make commitments, but then maybe we're afraid that we're not going to follow through or be able to keep our commitments. Or maybe we fear that 2026 will be even worse than 2025. I mean, remember what happened in 2019? We all thought 2020 was going to be amazing, and we're ready to leave 2019 behind, on to new things. And yeah, that was worse than 2019. And so maybe we have that same fear about the next year. And of course, here at PSD, we want to recommit ourselves this year to worship God, study His Word, love one another, and reach the lost, all that we might grow to God's glory. But growth is scary. Spiritual growth means leaving our comfort zones and stepping out in faith into all new territory. And that, honestly, the spiritual things, those can be the scariest things of all about a new year. So Dwayne and I, with the support of the shepherds, want to introduce our preaching theme for this year. It's called Be Strong and Courageous, From Fear to Faith. Our goal is to set all of our fears out on the table and just admit to ourselves and admit to God what we are most afraid of, and then talk practically with one sermon each month this year about how to overcome specific fears in our lives by faith. Things like our fear of God's calling, our fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being alone, fear of an unknown future, and many more. But for this morning, I really want us to consider why fear is such a huge problem, why it is one of the greatest enemies of faith, and why as Christians we must overcome fear. It's not an option. We must overcome it and not allow fear to dominate or control us. You know, the Bible tells us hundreds of times not to fear. It gives different names, like fear or dread or anxiety or worry or dismay, but it's addressed more than almost any other subject because God knew it would be one of the most formidable foes of faith and one of the easiest things to fall into. One writer observed that fear is the one emotion every one of us is born with. You know, when a baby comes out crying, it's not because of sadness or grief. It's terror of a new environment outside of our comfort zone. You know, inside of our mother, we were warm and we were surrounded by walls on all sides, and it was cozy and it was quiet in there. But now we come out totally exposed with bright lights in our faces we've never seen before, and beeping noises from machines and weird people in masks handling us and touching us and all that. And what we see so many times in Scripture is that when even the most faithful people encounter God and are called to serve Him, they resort back to this most primal and original of all emotions. And God tries so hard to reassure people, like a mother comforts a newborn. It's okay. Do not fear. I'm with you. I'm going to take care of you. Because God knows if we allow fear to dominate us, it'll be a disaster for our faith. It'll be a disaster for our relationship with Him and for the eternal trajectory of our lives. Fear is such a huge problem, really, in some, because fear and faith can never tie. When fear wins, faith loses. And that is what we see in our opening passage in Numbers 14. The Israelites had a choice between faith and fear. And when they chose fear, faith lost. And this morning, I want us to learn from this story why fear is such a huge problem for our faith. First of all, it's because faith destroys our reliance on God. I think it's helpful to acknowledge at the start that some fear is healthy and good. God designed us with natural fear responses to danger to protect ourselves. If we had no fear at all, we'd go out and play Frogger out on I-4. You know, if we had no fear at all, if there was some vicious dog running toward us, we'd just stand there and let ourselves get attacked. No, God designed our bodies to protect ourselves in moments of fear. And actually, when you look at the physiology of how this works, in moments of true fear, we get tunnel vision because God designed our bodies to suppress the prefrontal cortex of the brain that's responsible for reason and logic and careful moral discernment so that we can ignore everything but the threat. That's why if you see a vicious dog running towards you, you don't stop to think, I wonder what kind of dog that is. And, why is he so mean? Somebody must have really mistreated. I've never had a dog run at me before. I'm usually a dog person. No, you're not thinking any of that. Your brain is saying run or fight. That's it. Because you have to ignore all that other deep thought and just address the issue at hand, which is to get to safety. And that's super helpful. God designed that to be a blessing to us. But fear becomes a problem when we feel like there's a dog chasing us, but either, number one, the dog is imaginary and isn't even real, or the dog is real but can't hurt us, and we're afraid anyway. In those cases, and here's the thing, our body doesn't know the difference between these cases. And physiologically, the same thing happens. We still get tunnel vision, and it keeps us from seeing and thinking clearly about God. Adrenaline takes over. The prefrontal cortex shuts down, and instead of being logical and reasonable, we act on impulse and emotion, and our reliance on God goes right out the window. And this is what we see in Numbers 13. Notice their focus, especially in the pronouns in this text in Numbers 13. This is the 10 fearful spies bringing back this fearful report. And in verse 31, the men who had gone up with them said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us." So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone, in spying it out, is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight. The Israelites here have tunnel vision. And all they can see really is the threat. And that threat is not imagined. It is real. There actually are giants in that land. But the problem is they can't see God. And so they're only relying on themselves, and they know in our own strength, we cannot handle this. But remember when we read earlier from Joshua and Caleb, the men of faith, they did not allow fear to destroy their reliance on God. In fact, they encouraged reliance. And they said, the Lord will bring us into this land, and the Lord is with us, so do not fear them. Joshua and Caleb knew the threat was real. The giants in the land were not imaginary, but also they knew those giants could not hurt them as long as God was on their side. So imagine you see this vicious dog and he's running towards you and you're just so fixated on his teeth and on his, threatening snarl that you don't even realize you're looking at this dog through the bars of an iron gate between you. And he cannot get to you. That's what it's like for the Israelites. They're so fixated on the Canaanites and how terrifying this situation is. They don't see God standing between them. And they think that they're on their own and that they have to be self-reliant and defeat the Canaanites by their own strength, which only perpetuates their fear. I'm convinced, especially after studying the book of Isaiah, which is 66 chapters, but it's 66, I don't want to simplify it because it's such a robust and amazing and deep book. But after you study that book, you realize Isaiah is just 66 different ways of telling us not to be self-reliant. And so I came away with this from that class as a result of really 2 quarters in that class, that the essence of spiritual warfare as Christians is that we are in a daily battle against self-reliance. Every day we face new fears, and there's new challenges, and if we get tunnel vision and we can't see God, well then we become self-reliant control freaks, and we think we've got to do everything ourselves in our own way, in our own schedule, and so maybe we start micromanaging the people in our lives to make sure everyone's behavior is predictable and safe for me, or we stress out making sure we're planning for every single little contingency, and we've got all the 20 worst case scenarios, and what's going to happen if this happens, and what if is one of our favorite phrases. And, maybe we're paralyzed in action. We refuse to ever make a decision until we know for certain it's going to be the right one. Or maybe we become helicopter parents to keep our kids away from any danger whatsoever because we've got to control everything and to make sure that nothing bad happens ever. Now, God is not against planning, but there's a difference between planning in wisdom and planning in self-reliance. And, sometimes in our self-reliance, we may even make moral compromises and take shortcuts to get to ensure that things work out the way that we want them and the way that fits our schedule and our way of thinking. And it's because fear has shut down the reasoning part of our brain that knows God is with us and that we can trust Him, that we just run around like maniacs in survival mode, trying to protect ourselves and handle all of life's dangers on our own. And this is what we see from the Israelites in Numbers 14. Look at their brilliant plan for control. Verses 3 and 4 of chapter 14. They say, "Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt." Oh boy. Now, hey, at least they mentioned God here. They do know God exists, but because of their fear, they're thinking we can't trust Him. We're on our own here, and we have a much safer plan to go back to Egypt. Fear made them control freaks, and this is how they were going to take control of the situation. We will appoint a leader, and then he'll lead us back to Egypt. Can you imagine how insane that plan was? I mean, can you even fathom how awful and dumb that plan was? And what would have happened if they actually followed through with it? What that would mean for the future of Israel if they actually carried out this ridiculous plan. But you see, it didn't matter how bad the plan was. At least it was theirs. At least they had a sense of control. And that was way less scary than giving control over to God. Faith and fear can never tie. And because the Israelites fear won, their faith lost, and it destroyed their reliance on God. Secondly, fear destroys our memory of God's past help. So in verse 3, which we just read, where they're questioning God's character and why did He bring us out here to kill us, and He's terrible and all that. It's so mind-boggling that they are saying this only 1 year after leaving Egypt. They were prisoners there. They were slaves, groaning and crying out to God to save them. Yet within 1 year, it's like they had forgotten the horrors of Egypt. And they had forgotten the amazing grace of the God who saved them and set them free. Yet their fear, again, shut down the logical part of their brains. And fear can give us the same kind of spiritual amnesia in our lives. I mean, God could save us 1,000 times. But if that 1,001th time is scary and dangerous enough, we can throw our faith out the window and forget about the God who's delivered us the 1,000 times before. I was just talking to someone on the phone who is a Christian, and they were telling me they struggle with trusting in God because of all the hardships that they faced in life, and there's more hardships coming their way. But I've known this person for a very long time, and I have watched God deliver them from every single hardship of the past. And actually not just deliver them, but bless them in ways beyond what they could even imagine. And yet this person is still telling me they struggle to trust God. Why? It's because they were facing new hardships and new fears, and they were letting fear win over faith. This person was so afraid of the future that they forgot what God had done for them in the past. And it breaks God's heart when that happens. It even makes him angry. Look in Numbers 14, verses 11 and 12. The Lord said to Moses, verse 11, "How long will this people reject me? And how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst? I will smite them with pestilence and dispossess them, and I'll make you into a nation greater and mightier than they." It pains God to see fear win out over faith, because it means after all he has done for us, we still do not trust him. Imagine this scenario. Imagine you are married to someone, and for decades, you have consistently loved them and sacrificed for them and have a proven track record for 20 years that you have their best interest at heart. And yet they decide one day they're going to be filled with an irrational fear that you're just going to leave them and go cheat on them and be with somebody else. It's like their fear erased the memory of those previous 20 years of you proving the kind of person that you are, showing them that you're the kind of person that would never do that to them. And imagine how painful that would be for you to see your spouse every day living in the fear that you're going to abandon them and that you're going to not take care of them or that you're going to wrong them in some way. That's what it's like for God when he delivers us and saves us and we still don't trust him and we're still filled with fear that he's not going to take care of us in the future. Hurts him deeply, even angers him. Rightly so. Thirdly, fear destroys entire communities. Fear is like a disease. It rarely stays contained to one person or small group. I mean, it's contagious and it can spread to the larger community around us. There are a lot of really funny social experiment videos on YouTube. And one of my favorite ones is there'll be a guy and he's walking down a crowded street. And all of a sudden, he'll look behind him and go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa," and then he'll take off running. And other people, what's funny is they will not turn to see what he's looking at. Some will. Some people, they won't even turn to see what he's looking at, to see if there's a legitimate threat. They'll just take off running. Because they assume if this guy's running, the threat must be real, right? There must be something to run from. I don't have time. And again, that's part of the natural fear response that God gave us. That's fine. I probably would do the same thing. I'm not judging them for that. I'm taking off running if I see somebody running too. But the same thing can happen with us spiritually. If we see enough people afraid of something, instead of using the reason and logic part of our brains and questioning whether this is something actually worth being afraid of, we just jump on the bandwagon. It's like, well, they're afraid. I guess I'm going to be afraid too. I added this illustration this morning because I was with the Heinleys last night, and Amy Heinley was telling me about a story recently when she was on a plane, and the plane got struck by lightning. And she said there was just this huge boom on the plane, and I mean, it scared everybody, and the lights went out, and now the crew, they weren't really panicked about it because they knew what happened, and they know that the plane, is built to handle lightning strikes and all that. But everybody on the plane was struggling to stay calm. They knew the crew was calm, but they were kind of worried about what was happening. But it was really hard for everyone to stay calm because there was one lady on the plane, it wasn't Amy, but there was one lady on the plane screaming at the top of her lungs, "We're all gonna die!" I thought, what kind of person scares everyone? There's kids on the plane, and that Amy was saying, her kids are right next to her, and this lady is just screaming, "We're all gonna die." And yeah, Of course it was hard to stay calm in that environment. When somebody is screaming like you, maybe she knows something I don't, or maybe she's right. I guess we are all going to die, because that's how easily fear can take hold and spread. Now think about how crazy this is. And we don't often think about the numbers, because it's just, I know it's the book of Numbers, but we don't think of the full number, because we do know the numbers of those that came out of Egypt were 600,000 men. But that's not counting the women and the children. And so scholars estimate that there's anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million Israelites here in the book of Numbers. And all it took was 10 fearful men to fill 2 million other people with fear. That's astounding. After that speech by the 10 men about how they're just grasshoppers in their sight, and basically, you know what those 10 men were screaming? We're all going to die. That's what they were screaming. These giants are going to kill us. We'll get devoured by this land. Listen to the congregation's response in Numbers 14, verses 1 and 2. Then all the congregation lifted up their voices and they cried, and the people wept that night. And all the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, would that we had just died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had just died in this wilderness. Here we see that fear spreads faster and more easily than faith, especially, and I'll add this, when the fear is coming from the community leaders. You see, these 12 men, they were not just ordinary men. These were 12 representatives of the 12 tribes. And so for these 10 men to come back with this fearful report, these were leaders in the community, men that people trusted, and they were filled with fear. And so, of course, the rest of the people thought, if our leaders are filled with fear, what chance do we have? When fear wins out in our lives, it rarely stays there. It can infect the hearts of others, and it can even destroy a local church from within. Number 4, fear destroys our love for one another. We opened in Numbers 14, the first part of verse 10, where the congregation said, let's stone Joshua and Caleb. You see, because the Israelites were overcome by fear, Joshua and Caleb became a threat to them. When we're afraid, people become threats. Even people of faith become threats to us. And instead of being unified with their brethren, fear caused division between them to the point of wanting to kill them to remove the threat. There was a German pastor, and yes, I was tempted to call him a German shepherd, but he lived back before World War II started. And he actually went to one of Hitler's earliest speeches. And he attended this speech. And when he came home, his wife asked him what he had learned. And he responded, I discovered that Hitler is a terribly frightened man. Kind of reminds me of Herod from the last sermon I preached from Matthew 2, who was so terrified someone was going to take his throne, he became a terror to others because he lived in a state of paranoia. One writer said, fear releases the tyrant within. When we are afraid of our neighbor, we cannot love them and we cannot trust them, because love and trust require vulnerability, and that may make us open to being hurt, and that's too scary. When we're afraid of our neighbor, we will question their motives because they must be out to get us. We assume the worst in people. We can't work well with others, and we become cynical and jaded, and we lose our joy. Jesus did not say, by this all men will know that you are my disciples if you are afraid of one another. No. He said, if you love one another. And love and fear cannot coincide. Perfect love casts out fear, John says. We cannot love one another, and we cannot love the lost, the non-Christian world, if we're afraid of them. When fear wins out in our lives, it turns us against each other, and it turns us against the world. And it just turns us inward instead of outward in love. Number 5, fear destroys our opportunities for blessings by making excuses. Look in Numbers 13, again, verses 27 and 28. We didn't read these. Verses 27 and 28. And these are the 10 fearful spies speaking. In verse 27, thus they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, some translations say, however, The people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. You see, God is inviting Israel into this tremendous blessing of being in their own land, of moving from being a nation of slaves to a great nation that then becomes a light to the rest of the world in this land flowing with milk and honey. But their fear keeps them from taking hold of God's blessings, and instead they fixate on the nevertheless in verse 28. Again, some translations say however. And this is what fear does to us. Instead of finding God's blessings, fear always finds another however. We say, yes, I know God is going to bless me if I serve Him and I obey Him. However, and then we fill in that blank with X, Y, and Z excuses. And that's why when fear wins, God's blessings stay forever beyond our reach. And connected with that is this point, that fear destroys our purpose and keeps us stuck. Notice Numbers 14, verses 34 and 35. This is the consequence of allowing fear to win. God says this to them in verse 34 and 35, according to the number of days which you spied out the land, 40 days, for every day you shall bear your guilt a year, even 40 years, and you will know my opposition. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this I will do to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be destroyed, and there they will die. Again, God had amazing plans for Israel. He was calling them to a higher purpose. But because they allowed fear to win over faith, they forfeited their purpose. And they wandered aimlessly for 40 years in the wilderness until they died. This is what fear will do to us if we let it. Fear keeps us from growing spiritually. We will never do anything great or meaningful in life. We will forget who we are and why we have been put here. And we'll feel like we're just spinning our wheels in life because instead of stepping into our purpose and our calling, fear will make us perpetual wanderers who never accomplish anything for God. This year in our house-to-house book club, we're going to be reading the book called Fearless by Max Lucado. And he says this about how fear never leads to greatness. He says, fear never wrote a symphony or poem, negotiated a peace treaty, or cured a disease. Fear never pulled a family out of poverty or a country out of bigotry. Fear never saved a marriage or a business. Courage did that. Faith did that. People who refused to consult or cower to their timidities did that. But fear itself, fear herds us into a prison and slams the doors. That's what fear did for the Israelites. It kept them trapped in a prison of their own making. And the door to all the blessings in the promised land was slammed shut on them. And their fear kept them stuck for the rest of their lives. And finally, fear destroys our obedience. Numbers 14, where we started, in verse 9, Joshua and Caleb told them, only do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of the land. When we allow fear to win over faith, God sees it as rebellion. Now, in fairness, God is very patient with us and merciful when we struggle with fear. And He does whatever He can to comfort us and to reassure us and to strengthen our faith in Him. But if we give in to fear long enough and consistently enough, eventually our lack of faith moves from mere weakness to rebellion. And so in verses 22 and 23, God says this, surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurned me see it. This wasn't just a one-time thing for them. This wasn't just a moment of weakness and fear. This was a consistent pattern of them allowing fear to win over their faith. And they consistently disobeyed the Lord. The truth is, obedience to God is always scary because He asks us to do things that run counter to what is easy and natural. God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son on a mountain. God is asking the Israelites here to go in and fight these giants in the land of Canaan. Jesus asks us to take up our cross, to deny self, to love our enemies and follow Him. That's scary stuff. And unfortunately, fear makes safety and comfort our number one priorities, which makes God's commands to us a threat. When He asks us to leave safety and comfort behind, we'll hold on to the however and make any excuse we can. And we will rebel, not because we hate God, but because we're too afraid to serve Him. And God knows just how easy it is to give in to fear, and just how destructive it is to our faith, which is why He addresses the problem of fear over and over again in Scripture. Let me just go through some of these examples with you. Isaiah 41:10a, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. Jesus, Matthew 8:26, said to the disciples, why are you afraid, you men of little faith? And then later Jesus says to them again, take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. In Acts 18, Paul the apostle is scared. He is filled with fear. And the Lord said to Paul in the night by a vision, do not be afraid any longer, but you go on speaking, and you do not be silent. Romans 8 and verse 15, Paul says, you have not received a spirit of slavery leading to fear again, but you've received a spirit of adoption as sons, by which we cry out, Abba, Father. One more, 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and love and discipline. God knew this was going to be our most natural reaction to service in His kingdom. So He gives us hundreds of verses like these as constant reminders on every page of the Bible that fear and faith can never tie. When fear wins, faith loses. But you know, there's good news here. The good news is that the opposite is also true, that when faith wins, fear loses. And God has always called His people to move from fear to faith. In fact, after the generation of Israel died in the wilderness because of their fear, a new generation arose, and they were given a chance to choose faith over fear, unlike their parents. And listen to what God said to them. Turn over with me to Joshua chapter 1. This is the last passage we'll turn to this morning. Joshua chapter 1, verses 5 through 9. Listen to the very first thing God tells them in Joshua chapter 1 when they have a redo. They have another chance now to choose faith instead. Verses 5 through 9. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, and be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. This is God's call to us today in 2026. We may not be called to go into the battle, go into a battle zone against the Canaanites, but we'll be facing plenty of our own giants this year. And we're going to need to be strong and courageous, knowing that God is with us. And so I want to just leave us with 3 very practical action steps to take right now to help kickstart the journey from fear to faith this year. Number 1, name your fears. Let's just be brutally honest and put all of our fears out on the table. It might be good to list them in order from the greatest fears to the smaller ones. Naming it might sound like, I'm afraid to talk to people about Jesus. I'm afraid to break up with my boyfriend or girlfriend, even though the relationship is harmful to me, because I just don't want to be alone. I'm afraid I'll be alone forever. I'll never find anyone to marry. I'm afraid I'll stay stuck forever in a dead-end career. I'm afraid I'll never be good enough to please God. I'm afraid of world war. I'm afraid to try new ways to serve in the church because I might fail. I'm afraid my spouse is going to leave me. I'm afraid I'm going to get cancer or some other serious illness. I'm afraid I'll never be able to afford a house. Whatever it is, just get it out on the table, because there's so much power in naming it. Because if you don't name those fears, we'll just have this nebulous, vague sense of dread that just follows us around everywhere, and we won't really understand why, and we won't know what we're up against. So first, name them. Secondly, pray your fears. Whether the threats we're afraid of are real or imagined, let's tell God about it in prayer. Even if we're embarrassed to admit that we have these fears, He already knows anyway. So we might as well come clean and tell God about it and say, Lord, I know this may be all in my head, but it's plaguing my heart, and I need your help to overcome it. And when the threat is very real and not imagined, what I love so much about God is that He doesn't downplay it and tell us, don't be silly, there's no threat here. No. God acknowledges, yeah, the threat is real, but I'll be right here with you to help you face it, to help you overcome it. I think about Jesus in the garden. When He prayed, Father, if it is possible, remove this cup from me. He's praying that because He's afraid. And the threat is very real. The cross is not imaginary. And God does not tell Jesus, don't be absurd. There's no cross. You're getting all worked up over nothing. No. God knew the threat was real, and He knew it was going to hurt Jesus. It was even going to kill Jesus. But God knew the hurt was only temporary, and the death was only temporary because God was going to be with Him through it. And He made sure that death did not defeat Jesus in the end. And then finally, face your fears. One of the greatest marketing campaigns of all time was Nike's slogan, just do it. And that's because that slogan speaks to the heart of everyone who is afraid to make changes that they know are going to be hard and that are going to take them out of their comfort zone and that are going to be scary. And that slogan cuts through all of our excuses and maybe our concerns that, we just don't have enough technical know-how to go out there and exercise and make health changes. But the slogan just says, go face your fears and get it done. Now, Dwayne and I are going to spend the rest of the year talking about specific strategies for conquering fears in our lives. But, for the most part, conquering fears is not really about technical know-how. The Israelites, they didn't have to go through Navy SEAL training, in order to get the technical combat skills to go and reduce their fears of the Canaanites. No, it's about putting our faith in God. It's about being strong and courageous and just doing it, trusting Him with the unknown outcomes. And my hope is that now that we've seen in this lesson just how destructive the problem of fear is, that we will be ready to name and to pray and to face our fears in faith in 2026. And you know what? You won't be alone. We're all in this together, and God will go with us as we move from fear to faith. One of the most motivating things, if you're wondering, how could I do this? How could I go from fear to faith? I think one of the most motivating things is to realize that's what Jesus did for you. Jesus went from fear to faith so that we could be saved. If I were Jesus, I can imagine from heaven, I would just have no shortage of excuses for why I shouldn't have to come and die on a cross. I think I'd be hanging on to however forever if I were Jesus. Yet Jesus knew if He let fear win over His faith, it would destroy all of humanity. And we'd all be lost for all eternity. So Jesus chose faith. He chose to overcome His fear for you. And the question is, will you overcome your fear for Him? Will you choose to put your faith in Him? Maybe you've been thinking about becoming a Christian, but you're afraid because, hey, what is that going to mean for my life? And I'm going to have to change things, and I got to get new friends maybe. Well, you just trust God with that. You just come to God, you put your faith in Him, and He'll take care of all those things. You can be saved this morning by putting your faith in Him and being baptized for the remission of your sins. And if you've done that already, and you've given yourself over to fear, and you're letting fear win, God says, remember, I'm with you. And that with me by your side, there's nothing to fear. If we can help you, let faith win over fear this morning. Come forward and let us know how while we stand and sing.